Welcome back to the Pursuit Podcast. Before we get started, I want to first say thank you to our sponsor, Neximo. Neximo not only allows us to keep operating this podcast, but they also supply developers with APIs for SMS, voice, authentication, and a lot of other really interesting tooling for developers. If you want to find out more about what they do, hop to neximo.com. If you want to thank them for sponsoring the podcast, say hi to them at Twitter at NeximoDev. I'm your host, Jessica Rose. Today we're here with
Michelle Glauser. I am a software engineer and the founder and CEO of Techtonica.
We're here to talk about Techtonica, and I'm really excited to be chatting about it. Can you sort of walk me through what Techtonica does?
Sure. So we are a nonprofit. We offer 6 months of tech training with living stipends and childcare stipends, as well as laptops to local women and non-binary adults with low incomes. And by local, I mean the Bay Area at this point. And then following the program, we place graduates with sponsored companies for employment, and then they start their pathway into tech.
So not just a learn to code class and not just a boot camp, but something that instead of costing tens of thousands of dollars to retrain, pays you a stipend, gives you the opportunity to get a stipend for childcare, and then helps get you into work.
Exactly.
How long have you all been operating?
About 2 years now.
That's fantastic. So just ballpark, how many people do you think you've worked with to get all the way into employment?
I can say right off the top of my head because so far it's just 8 people. But we've also had quite a few workshops with different nonprofits around the Bay Area. For those, we've had, I think, over 340 attendees at this point.
So I'm going to be very rude and do something I don't usually do with a guest, and I'm going to absolutely fuss you out. Yeah, 8 is a fantastic number. This is 8 people who weren't working in industry, wouldn't have had necessarily the funds to train into it, and you gave them a safe, supported, paid route into work that pays fantastically in the Bay.
Yeah, it's nothing to be ashamed about. I am so proud of them. They just graduated 1 month ago, actually, and now they're all working. And we have weekly check-ins. I actually have a call right after this with them. And then we have volunteer evenings each week, and they are invited to that for mentoring. So I'm just so excited for them. I hope this is a really good start for them into tech.
So you've been operating for 2 years, and you've got 8 people in work.
Yeah.
What does that feel like?
Oh my gosh, it feels so great. Honestly, I haven't had a lot of time to actually process that and think about it because we're already working towards getting more companies on board for hiring and getting enough funding and organizing a fundraiser and making improvements to the program. But I'm very happy that we got to that point. There were so many bumps along the way. And I remember one morning on my way to work, I was biking in and I just thought, I am going to make the first announcement today of who's going to be placed where. And it just kind of hit me. And I had to stop for a second and like get a hug from my spouse and just be like, oh, we did it. So yay, I'm very happy about it.
So if maybe our dear listener like me is like, oh, this sounds fantastic, how can I help? It sounds like there are things going on right now that you could use help with either from companies or from individuals.
Absolutely. We always can use more help. We depend quite a bit on volunteer work. So we have an open source curriculum that's been entirely developed by industry professionals. So we always need help with that. And then as far as our biggest needs go, we need funding so we can cover training and living and childcare stipends and equipment. And then the companies that hopefully will sponsor will be the ones that also provide that employment following the training. So we need connections. I often feel like my connections are really great and in the industry and willing to help, but they aren't really the people who can write the checks. So I would love to get more of those connections so we can make sure to help more people as we move forward.
Okay, so let's walk through these different routes to help one by one.
Okay.
If I am far away and I don't have a lot of cash, where can I find this open source curriculum to sort of pitch in a bit?
Yeah, it's on GitHub. So GitHub/Techtonica/curriculum. There, we just have all of the things that need to be worked on in GitHub issues. And then we break those up into GitHub projects for each volunteer week. And then if you go to github.com/Techtonica/keyboard shortcuts program, we are also building this program for our attendees to learn better how to use keyboard shortcuts on MacBooks. Most of them haven't used MacBooks. They don't know a lot of keyboard shortcuts. You couldn't find anything anywhere that provided that kind of practice. There's lots of typing, but nowhere did we find keyboard shortcuts. So we are building that, and it's going to be open source and anyone can use it.
That's pretty helpful because I am secretly terrible at Mac keyboard shortcuts.
I myself, we came up with the list of which things we wanted to quiz on and help people practice. And I was like, oh, there are a whole bunch I need to learn here. So I'm excited as well.
But what if I'm somebody who's just got some cash? I'm an individual who's got a little bit of coin floating around. Is there someplace I could just donate directly?
Yes, go to techtonica.org/donate. And there are several options for how you can do it. There's Venmo, check, direct deposit, and a platform we use called We Did It.
Fantastic. But let's say I am a high-powered, I was going to say shoulder padded, but that's dating me a bit. That's not a thing anymore, is it? I am a high-powered tech yeah, I would be pretty okay if they came back. Not for me, thank you. I'm not going to stick them into my hoodies personally, but I am a high-powered tech. That's not very likely. Let's try it again. Our dear listener, there we are, is a high-powered tech executive, shoulder pads or not. How could they get in touch about sponsoring the program, or how could they get in touch if they really, really wanted to look at hiring some of your folks?
Yeah, so there's another page on our website, techtonica.org/sponsor, and it gives you all of the information about sponsoring as well as an info sheet you can download to show other people. And then there's a form to fill out saying that you're interested. And as soon as you fill that out, I email you and say, great, let's hop on a call. Here's a link to grab something off my calendar. And then we have a talk and I just answer any questions you have and we move forward from there.
Fantastic. So this is something that I feel like most of my guests, I go ahead and chat to them about this in some detail, but I'm especially interested in chatting to you. So you're a software engineer and you run this program.
Yes.
You could probably guess what I'm going to ask you about.
Go for it.
How on earth do you do this and how tired are you?
Yeah. How on earth do I do it? Let me back up a little and say that I was only doing software engineering in 2015. I had been doing a tiny bit of community organizing for a couple of women in engineering groups. But
I love how you're like, oh, well, I was only doing this other highly skilled thing. Not really. I love that only. And you feel less tired if you say only enough.
Yeah, I guess so. My spouse's coworker was on some recruitment ads, and got a lot of pushback from people saying she's not a real engineer. She doesn't look like an engineer. So I reached out to her and said, I think we should put up billboards in response to this. And we ended up doing an I Look Like an Engineer ad campaign and raised money and put up ads showing underrepresented engineers. And it was so stressful and probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. And at the end of it, I said, A, that was super hard, but I did it. I can do hard things. And B, it was so amazing to work on something I'm so passionate about, and I want to do more of that. And so I started moving more into social justice in tech and community organizing and getting workshops ready for people who are local to the Bay Area with low incomes. And we did computer workshops, coding workshops at computer labs. So people who didn't have laptops could still come learn a bit.
Yeah.
So that's where things started changing. And then I became the leader of Pi Ladies San Francisco, just
with all that free time you have.
Yeah, the leader who was here moved to New York, and she said, I really want to leave this with you. And I said, I don't have time. And she said, here you go.
A true friend.
Yeah, yes. But I found a really great way to streamline that process. So now we just have a couple of meetings a year. We plan out the entire year, and it doesn't actually take as much time as it did the first year I did it. And then I also joined Diversity Advocates leadership team. So I'm doing all of these things. And I have to say that I often think I wouldn't be able to have the energy to do all of them if I didn't have the passion for diversity and inclusion in tech. I always wanted to be some kind of entrepreneur. I never, ever, ever thought I would end up being the founder of a nonprofit, but I just can't imagine trying to pitch something like, I don't know, Uber for dogs or something, and feeling passionate about that enough to get up every morning and just keep going. And I'm so glad I'm working on something that has a lot of meaning. It's great.
That sounds amazing. So it's a combination of, I hate to sort of sum this up for you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds as if you wound up doing all of this. You wound up doing so much because you were fantastic at so much of it.
Maybe. I like to think I do an okay job. There are always bumps, but when I get discouraged, it's funny. My spouse knows exactly what to say. He'll say things like, well, you may not be the best one for this, but you're the one doing it, and that's what matters. Or I'll say, I don't know, it's so hard, I don't know. And he'll be like, then you should stop. And he knows that just riles me up. And I'm like, no, I'm not stopping. I'm going to make it even better.
So like making sure that the people in your life, whether they're spouses or romantic partners or friends or coworkers, should probably be there to make your life better and easier.
Yes. Honestly, I could not do it without his support. He comes to every Techtonica event and helps me talk through things when I'm trying to make a hard decision. So it's really great.
So let's say hypothetically, our dear listener is somebody who's been trying to get into tech and somebody who doesn't have the funds to do a boot camp. Yeah. Should they come and talk to you if they're in the Bay Area?
Maybe.
Okay.
Yes. And the reason I say that is because I just absolutely felt like so many of the programs and workshops I'd seen out there were just getting to people who already had a tech network and already knew about pathways into tech. So we specifically don't have an open application process.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah. Instead, we partner with nonprofits from around the Bay Area, and we offer free coding workshops to their communities. And at these workshops, let me back up and just say all of the flyers specifically say free workshop, learn how to build a website. This is specifically for women and non-binary adults with low incomes, and you should already be digitally literate, which we count as someone who's able to use a mouse and a keyboard and email and a browser.
Okay. So a very, very firm, here's what we can do and here's what we can't.
Yes. Yes. So if people come to me, I'll say, are you already working with a nonprofit community at this point? And then try to refer them that way, because then we know that they have kind of already been vetted, if that makes any sense. We know they're from the population that needs it the most.
And it kind of takes away the need for you to be like, oh, what do we think low income is? How do we judge that? How do we adjudicate that? Be like, well, let's work with partners.
Right. We do still tell people that our cutoff is 50,000. But even with that, I feel bad sometimes because I've read all these articles saying that 100,000 is now considered low income.
So I really love running this podcast because we've got really fabulous listeners from all over the world. And for folks based in other areas, the idea of 100,000 being low income has to be baffling.
It's baffling to me, and I've lived here for many years.
What do you find the biggest challenges are for the folks who come through your program?
The biggest challenges. Yeah, I think the biggest challenges for our participants, there are many, but I would say the biggest are probably trying to understand this tech culture and fit in is a huge one. I feel like one thing that's very much missing from the diversity and inclusion in tech conversation is socioeconomic inclusion. So I specifically talk to our participants as well as the companies that will be hiring them about some of the socioeconomic differences they'll run into to kind of warn them. So when they get there, they can remember, oh yeah, Michelle told us about this. We're just going to move on.
So this sounds like it could be really useful for folks who are already in tech and maybe folks, I'm not sure if fancy is the right word, but folks who are well established and doing okay. What kind of socioeconomic issues or socioeconomic differences would you like folks already in tech looking out for and trying to make it easier for folks to get who are getting into it?
So I like to recommend this book by Alfred Lubrano called Limbo. And it's all about class straddlers and how they feel like they no longer belong in the groups that they grew up in. They've been kind of rejected by them, but at the same time, those groups really have a lot of expectations of them that they'll help pay bills and stuff. On the other hand, they don't really feel like they fit into this new white collar world. So when people, for example, will say, okay, we're having party for the company and it's cocktail dress, and they're like, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. Or people from blue collar backgrounds can often be more physical or more direct in their language, and so they will often kind of end up with a file with HR because they get reported for things when that's how they dealt with it and that's how they learned to deal with communicating with people. Or I know that they will often feel more imposter syndrome. And so they'll just work super hard. They have such a hard work ethic. And so they feel like they have to work even more to try and make up for the other things that they might be lacking or that they feel that they're lacking.
Are there any sort of logistics issues that you'd love to be able to tell companies like, hey, you may be doing this or this or this, but please stop? The reason I'm asking is specifically, so I made a pretty big salary jump by getting into tech, and I'm obnoxiously proud of it. So wasn't from an extremely fancy background, got to be accidentally 3 out of 10 fancy. I don't know what the fancy scale is.
I don't know what it is either.
And starting my first well-paid job, part of it was, okay, we've bought your ticket, fly on down and check into this hotel. We'll just reimburse you on your first paycheck.
Oh, right? That's so terrible.
Of course you have $2,000.
Yeah, or they'll say, we want you to come be with our team. Even if you're in the same city, we want you to be with our team for 5 days. And of course you can take 5 days off of your existing job and cover your costs anyway, you know?
And someone will feed my cat. Like, everything will be fine.
Yeah. Or if they have kids, it's just really difficult. I love that they're trying to make it a more personal thing and to check that they can be good collaborators, because in the past, the stereotype was very much, we just want the genius coder who sits in the basement alone. But yeah, they're not recognizing the ways that isn't inclusive, definitely.
What are your biggest hopes for the folks that you get to support through the program? You just say, do you know what, at the end of this, or years and years, decades and decades and decades in the future, when we're both old and gray and our dear listeners forgotten this conversation entirely, what do you want to look back on this and say, oh, do you know what? I'm okay. I'm happy. This was the outcome.
You know, I really just want to make sure that people feel empowered and that they feel like this is a good path and it's something they can stay in. I think getting people in is just the first step, and helping them to stay in a happy, fulfilled way is very important. So I just would like to see them able to support themselves and their families and kind of paying it forward. And I'm already seeing some of that. So I am very happy about that, and I hope that can continue.
When you talk to people who are potential participants for the program, what's the pitch? You say, hey, come be in tech. The pay's okay, and sometimes they give you free beer?
No.
Okay.
So usually they'll find out at the end of one of our workshops. We'll say, who really liked this? Who would consider doing something like this full time for a job? And then we'll say, we also have a full-time program. It's 6 months. Here are all of the perks of it. And we place you at the end and help you build up a tech network. And then we ask them if they would be interested. And then they can come to one of the application workshops where we give them a lot of information about the program and tech. I also have a little bit of a lecture about what is tech even and what roles there are. Because I heard one woman once in the Tenderloin, which is an area of San Francisco very famous for its poverty. She just got so upset and she said, "What even is tech? No one tells us. It's this word in the sky. And the only thing available to us there is security guard positions. And I have to work 2 of them to pay for my rent."
Hard
and
pass.
I just thought, wow, why?
Yeah.
Why do we expect that they can just make their way in if they don't even know what the opportunities are or what kind of training you need to do for those different opportunities? So we also include some modules about different pathways in tech during our training, so they can learn about sales engineering or technical program management or entrepreneurship. So I feel like there are many pathways, and I just want to share that with people who don't know about them. I didn't really tell much of my own story, but I feel like I lucked out stumbling into tech.
Tell us your own story, please.
Okay. So I grew up in a large blue-collar family, and I didn't know at all about any career opportunities with computers, even though I always loved them and was in a couple of different computer clubs. And then I was working in San Francisco in 2012, full-time at a startup, doing pretty much everything except for engineering. And I could barely pay my rent. And I just kept thinking, why am I working full-time and I can't pay my rent? So I kept looking at the engineers and thinking what they do is so awesome and they make way more money than I do. So I finally just Googled how to build a website and found this brand new concept of a coding boot camp and thought, I don't really understand what this coding thing is, but it seems awesome and I want to do it. So I applied and got in, but I couldn't afford the tuition. So I thought about it for a while.
Was the tuition, what, $20,000, $15,000?
No, they were so brand new at that point. I think it was like $6,500 or something.
What? I mean,
Yes.
That's great, but that's also like a huge pile of money.
Yeah, it's more than tripled since. So basically, I finally thought, I know how to do this. And I turned to my boyfriend and said, let's get married next month and ask everyone we know for money.
Nice.
And that's how I paid for my tuition. Yeah, I always feel kind of embarrassed telling that story, but I just like to make the point that when you are already struggling, it's so hard to get the training you need to empower yourself and not struggle anymore. And I had to do something silly like that in order to do it. So yeah, I did the program. I loved it. Software engineering was so much more creative and versatile than I expected. And within a couple of weeks of graduating, I had a new job and negotiated to triple my income. So
yes.
I loved
Fantastic.
that adult stability. Yeah, it was amazing.
What did that first paycheck feel like?
Oh, it was fantastic. In fact, right after the negotiating happened, I had practiced this negotiating with my then husband or now husband multiple times because I was so nervous about it. I was so surprised because I gave a higher number and expected the manager to come back with a lower one. But he said, let me check with finance. And he called back and said, okay, it's good. And I was like, wait. It is? Cool. Okay. So yeah, my husband was so happy and proud of me. And he was bragging to everyone that I was making more than he was. And I just couldn't. I'd never had that much in my bank account within actually probably like 3 months. I had more than I'd ever had in my bank account. So that was awesome.
What kind of advice would you have given to you back then or to a version of you who's out there listening now?
Back then, before I was in tech, you mean?
Yeah, when you were like, oh, I really want to do this boot camp, but there's this impossible, short of get married and get a bunch of cash envelopes.
That's so hard. Part of the reason I started Techtonica was because I felt like all of the existing training programs made it impossible for so many people. And so if I were in those shoes now, there's no way, even with that wedding money, that I would have been able to afford that tuition. So yeah, I guess I would say, social capital is so important and make it your best friend because you're going to need those connections to get in. And you can build those through going to a lot of tech meetups and talking to everyone. And then B, there are quite a few great resources online to get you started. And when you get stuck, that's what the meetups are for. You get stuck, you go to a meetup, especially the study group ones, And then you can say, hey, I was working on this tutorial and couldn't get past this part. How do I make it past? And then hopefully at some point you will have the social capital and the skills to be able to start applying for jobs without some kind of formal training. Even now, it's so hard. It took a very long time for most companies in Silicon Valley, and even now some struggle with it, to accept boot camp graduates. Now it's almost like that's become the formal thing, right? If you don't have that, then good luck. It's just so hard.
One thing I really love in chatting with you is that you've mentioned several times, and you've touched on the need to have a network and the value of social capital. I'd love to dig into this a little deeper, because I think for folks outside of tech, well, maybe even for folks inside of tech, talking about networking sounds terrifying, doesn't it? Do I have to get business cards? What am I doing? What are we doing? How scary should networking feel?
How scary should it feel? So I will say this is another thing that is a big difference between classes. So people with blue collar backgrounds can often feel like networking is just schmoozing and not very authentic. So that's one of the first things I tell participants, like, it feels weird, but this is how it's done, and this is how you're going to get a foot in. So yeah, networking is so important, and it doesn't have to be super awkward. I think it's best if people just practice. And I always tell myself when I feel like I'm in an awkward situation, like, no shame, just go for it. And I've had people kind of laugh at how I'll just smile my cheesiest smile and go up and introduce myself to someone, but it pays off. It's probably hands down the best way you can get a foot in, because you don't already have those high up connections, and you're going to need quite a few in order to eventually get all of the jobs that you want throughout your career. So yeah, it doesn't have to be super awkward. I think people are often very happy when you do the introducing, because they also are there for networking, right? And they also feel awkward, and they just would love it if someone else took that out of their hands and made that first introduction.
I lived in the South in the States for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And for folks who are unfamiliar with those, networking's like making friends, but it's very sort of light touch, dental, polite. Like, oh, hi, what are you doing? That's cool. Do you want some soda? I always think it feels a little bit like going to someone else's church. You're not going to be best friends with them, but you're polite and you're like, oh, wow, what do you do? Oh, cool, you're so-and-so's aunt. Just so that if you run into them again, you've got a general idea, but you don't have to remember everything about them. And you don't have to shout your life story at them.
Right, definitely. I just read this book called Captivate, all about body language and using it to your advantage when networking and doing other social things. And it had some really great advice. They did all of these studies to figure out where the best place is to stand at a networking event, and what you should do to make people like you more. And it's a really great book. I definitely recommend it.
So this has just been such a fantastic conversation. You've touched on the incredible work you're doing. It's been really, really exciting to get to hear a little bit of your story and how you got into tech and sort of what you valued when you get here. And I love, love, love the networking tips. I would personally keep you on the phone all day, but I think that you're probably going to have to go and have maybe half a dozen meetings more.
Yeah.
to stay with being perpetually busy. Before we let you escape, I just wanted to sort of retrack over where people can find your work. So if they want to find out more about Techtonica, where should they head?
Yeah, just to techtonica.org. We are also very active on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter.
But if I wanted to find out more about what you're doing personally and watch you be way too busy, where can I find you online in a non-creepy, non-stalkery way?
You can go to michelleglauser.com. It outlines all of it, has lots of great links. And I do a lot of tweeting.
First
too.
And last name, nice.
Yes.
Good call.
That's the great thing about having a pretty unique name. I think there are only 4 or 5 of us in the world.
There are a lot of Jessica Roses.
Yeah, I believe it.
I've made my peace. And where on earth could we find you on Twitter then?
Yeah, it's just at Michelle Glauser. It's kind of long, but I just wanted to stick with my name.
It's very on brand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I usually tweet about tech and inclusion stuff. So if that's your thing, then follow me there.
Fantastic. And one more time, just to recap, what do you need from people for Techtonica right now?
Funding and positions at your companies.
Fabulous. If you've got the cash, if you want to help out on the curriculum, or if you want to hire some really brilliant people, techtonica.org. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to keep up with what we're doing at the Pursuit Podcast, you can find us on Twitter @PursuitPod. We'll see you next Tuesday with a brand new episode.